I'd like to welcome everybody and let you know that my name is Joan Bauk. I'm one of the adult programming librarians at the St. Mary's County Library in Leonardtown, Maryland. I'm really excited tonight because we have Christina Baker Kline here. She's with us all the way from Maine. And the second reason I am excited is today is the kickoff for our summer reading program. And it's called Tales and Tales, Tales and Tails. And if you have not signed up for it yet, go ahead to our webpage and there will be all kinds of prizes for your reading and the activities that you complete. So I would like to invite everybody to do that. Christina Baker Kline is the author of 8 novels. She's a New York Times bestselling author. She has written Orphan Train and A Piece of the World, and her newest book, The Exiles. These are the ones that you're hearing so much about right now. I heard about The Exiles about a year ago. My favorite genre is historical fiction, and because of COVID, a lot of us librarians were able to attend programs and webinars and conferences that we never would have been able to attend in person. A lot of things were virtual. And last May, I saw Christina Baker Kline speak at the Library Journal Day of Dialogue. And I was so excited about this book, The Exiles, that was getting ready to come out in August. I just had to talk with her and share her with our community. So I feel very lucky that her schedule has allowed her to do this with us tonight. And with that, I want to introduce Christina Baker Kline. Go ahead. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. I know, I'm so excited to be here with you all. My paperback is coming out in 2 weeks of The Exiles, and I think maybe a bunch of you have probably read Orphan Train and possibly A Piece of the World, which is, I think, the hardest book I've ever written, and we can talk about that. But I'm just delighted to be here, and I think one of the things I've learned over the past year of COVID is how important, to me at least, books are, how important reading is, and how much I've gotten out of immersing myself in literature when the world is crazy and there's so much that's unsure. And I'm sure that you probably know that, Joan, and as someone connected with books, as a librarian, that there's a form of solace that you get nowhere else reading a book.
Yes. And I've got one more person I'm trying to let in, so I'm going to go ahead and let them in. There we go. Like I said, we were so fortunate because most of our librarian classes or conferences, they're out of town and we're not able to attend them. And this year, I was able to see so many authors like yourself with these new books that have come out. And The Exiles was one of these. And I've got a picture of it here. I had to borrow this book from a library in Charles County. I'm in St. Mary's County, and that tells you how popular Christina's books are, because all of the books, The Orphan Train, The Exiles, and A Piece of the World, all of our copies have been checked out. We have digital copies online. We have audio copies online. I said to someone today, I'm in a little closet-like office doing this recording, and I said, it looks so plain behind me. And she said, well, why don't you get some of Christina's books and put them on the shelf? This is the only one I have. So that tells you how.
I love that. I mean, look, I feel like, the Zoom thing is really hard, and we've all, I think probably all of you who've been here tonight know that there are some great events, and there are others that you just are not fun, and it's hard to take a chance on an event at night. I mean, I personally find the nighttime thing really difficult because you want to have dinner with your family or whatever, or there's lots going on, or maybe there's a great TV show at 7 o'clock. So I understand that it's never easy to create a quorum at that hour. Whereas in person, as you know, Joan, we would advertise and have people there. It would be a different thing. It's sort of an event that you do. So I feel like in this moment when we're in between, when we have both, when we have Zoom events, and I'm doing a couple of live events this summer as well. It's such an interesting moment to think about what works, what doesn't, how people respond differently on Zoom, how, we authors kind of do what you want or don't do what you want on Zoom. And, I love all the possibilities of the different ways of kind of interacting with people who read. I mean, I'm a reader. That was the way I began, of course, like most of us, like all of us, I think, who are here. I grew up devouring books, and I just think you develop a relationship with the author of a book, whether you meet them in person or not. And you have these kind of conversations in your mind as you're reading a book about like what's going on. And that's part of the thing I love about Goodreads and Amazon, is that you do feel like you get a window into like why people are reading you, what they like about what you're doing, what they don't like about what you're doing, which is, super interesting and helpful. So let me just say that with Exiles, I made a bunch of creative choices in that book. I don't want to give it away because some of you may not have read it, but that are shocking, a little bit, they were shocking to me as I wrote it. And I think they're shocking to readers about what happens to some of the characters in the book. And so I wanted to sort of highlight, and I think this really comes through in the novel, that, the women who went into the convict program, who were targeted essentially as breeders, who were young women in England and Ireland and Scotland and Wales, and they were sent to Australia. Australia was 9-to-1 men to women in the early 19th century. And Britain wanted to populate that country. And so they swept women off the streets under the flimsiest of pretenses. And the idea that you've got this whole population of people who are being sent to a land where they'll never get back to their homeland is pretty amazing to think about. And for me, it was akin to the Orphan Train story, that it's just is so devastating to the people who are in it, and also so life-changing. And the interesting thing about both the Orphan Train book and Exiles, to me, is that many of those women ended up better off than they would have been. And so that's an interesting thing.
So with Exiles, for those of you who have not read it, actually, I would love to know, since we don't have that big of a group, raise your hand if you have not read it. If you have read it, go ahead and raise your hand. So
wait, that was confusing. Okay,
right.
have you not read it? Raise your hand. Got it. Right. And you guys, Kelly Palmer, Trish, you might as well make yourselves known if you want to, because we're all here and this,
I wanted to ask that question because there are so many surprising things in the book, but the summary, Christina, that very quickly, there are 3 women are the main characters.
Yeah.
The book starts out with a scene of an Aboriginal girl. So that is the one story. There's an Aboriginal girl in Australia who has been taken from her village because of the English colonization. The English have kind of gone over to Australia, and they're trying to really make these people just like themselves. They're taking the Aboriginal, customs away from them and trying to make them English. And then we have women who were in England who have been picked up off the streets, like Christina says, for petty crimes. And it's interesting, Christina, because you've mentioned in other interviews that these women, it really wasn't that they wanted to teach them a lesson and put them in jail and make them better people. It was that they needed women to be over in Australia.
It's so crazy. I mean, so just to give you a little historical background, and by the way, Dave, my husband, okay, that's my husband. Hi. And so we're in this bar on Islesford, which is on Cranberry Island in Maine. And our friend who owns the bar and is a restaurateur said to come and use it. So just go make a drink. He's not going to care. Go do it. Okay, that's my advice to my husband. Wait a minute, where were we with the question again?
We were talking about the women in England. If you committed any kind of crime, instead of being just put in a jail or given some kind of penance, small penance for these petty crimes, they knew that they had to increase the female population in Australia. So they were just sending these women to Australia to balance out the number of male criminals that had been in Australia. And that's one of the big bases of the book.
There's so much of our history, our world history, that's fascinating and sexist and interesting in that way. So the way it happened actually is that we Americans, I think most of you, I think probably all of you are American, we declared our independence from England and England was in the habit of sending their criminals here. So we had 50,000 convicts who came over, before we declared our independence, and were just incorporated into society, went into prisons, then became part of America and society. But once we declared our independence, we decided no, there are going to be no more convicts from England. We do not want their refuse anymore. So then once we said, hey, we're our own independent country, they had a problem. They didn't know what to do. So they went to Africa first and they thought maybe we could set up a colony here, but it didn't work there because the coast was too rocky and there were all these opportunities for escape. They couldn't figure it out. And then they looked to Australia. So the French had been there, the Dutch had been there, but the British came in and were like, we're gonna take over, people. So you Dutch and British and French, who cares? And they came in and they said, here's our flag in the sand, we're establishing a colony, you guys need to leave. And that's how it happened back in the day in the 1840s, which I think is so interesting. It was in the 1780s, whatever. But to get up to the 1840s, Australia was founded by Britain with all these male convicts. And by 1803, there were 9-to-1 men to women in Australia. And they realized they didn't just want to establish a penal colony, they wanted to establish a sort of respectable colony where there were citizens who lived and took over. And so they needed women. And that was how they decided to target these women. And that's what happened. So these convict women had done the flimsiest of things. They had and they were all crimes of poverty. I mean, these women were destitute. There were no social programs. There was no child care. There was nothing for women who were at the bottom rungs of the social ladder. So they had stolen a loaf of bread or maybe a silver spoon or possibly a bolt of cloth. And they ended up in Australia. And the whole point was to get breeding age women. So they had women in their, 15 to 35, basically. And in fact, that's what happened. So Australia was populated by these women, and 20% of Australians today are descended from convicts, which I think is super interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing because we all think of Australia as this wonderful place to go and visit and tour and to think that the people that were a really good point is that these convicts that were sent there have made lives for themselves, and it's a beautiful place.
It's fantastic. You know what? Australia is really interesting. I mean, it's sort of a funhouse mirror of America. People are very free and loose. There's a kind of energy there that's very intoxicating. I love going to visit. I hope you guys will all visit if you haven't already. But I found that it felt a lot like the energy of Australia feels a lot like America, which is that it's a separate outpost. It was a settlement of Britain. We established our independence, as you know, or probably know, they didn't. So, I mean, the Queen is still their queen, which is so interesting.
Right.
There's a big movement right now to change that, but.
How did you get interested, the Orphan Train was written about that period in our history where these orphans were picked up and sent out west so that they could help on farms. And
Yeah.
A Piece of the World is about a true story about, well, it's historical fiction, but it's about a woman who was a real person, and Andrew Wyeth painted a picture, and the story was written about that. How did you come up with this idea to write The Exiles?
You know, the question of how you come up with the book is always so complicated and interesting. Like I've learned that I'll often, something will happen. I'll read something and I'll get this sort of spidey tingle that makes me realize this is the book I want to write. But I don't always understand why I feel that way until later. So I read a piece in the New York Times, a very small piece. Nobody paid any attention to it. It was about convict women and children on boats. And this columnist, Lisa Belkin, was sort of making the comparison. She was sort of paralleling parenting today with what it was like then. And that was interesting to me. But I also had this like immediate feeling like this is the book I want to write. And the fact is, I taught in a women's prison. I'd been to Australia as a Rotary Fellow. I'd written a book with my mom about women and feminism and sort of expressing themselves. And so I think all of those things led actually to wanting to that spidey sense where I wanted to write the book. But I didn't realize until after I started that that was what it all was. And so my advice, if there are any aspiring writers in the group or any writers here, is, you know, pay attention to the tingle. Even if you don't know why you feel that way, it actually really matters. And it often comes out of something really primordial in yourself that's very deep, and you don't always know what it is.
How long, if you read the book, for those of you who have not read it yet, there is all kinds of information about the first of all, one of the characters was a governess. She was a governess in a very well-to-do family. So you have the facts about what that type of life was like. Then you have the facts about what life was like on these prison ships. They spent 4 to 6 months on a ship. These were women, no air conditioning. The food was horrendous. The cleanliness was horrendous. So you portray that. Then you portray what it was like once they got to Australia and how they were allowed as prisoners to go out and work for the colonists that were in Australia. How, with all this research, how long does it take you to piece it all together and create this story?
You know, at the moment, it's about 3 years start to finish with my publication process. I researched solidly for a year, and then I plunge into the writing, but it takes so long. I mean, on the one hand, that sounds like a lot. It sounds like a lot to me. On the other hand, it doesn't sound like that much, in that it's actually so immersive. And the other issue, Joan, is that I have a bunch of books, so there's a lot going on. Like I'm dealing with other. There's some film stuff happening. There's other stuff happening, and so I'm sort of trying to figure out how to balance all of that. And that's part of the job. It's just part of the job. But so like, for example, right now I'm promoting, this book, The Exiles, is coming out in a couple of weeks in paperback. Okay. And I love the paperback cover, and it's really fun. And we're having a really great event with all these wonderful writers: Ellen Hildebrand, Kristen Hanna, Paula McLean, Chris Bojalian, all of whom have really big books right now. And it's being emceed by a writer named John Searles, who's just great. And so I'm very involved in all of that. And it's a little bit hard to dive back into your new book when you're doing, the work for the other book that you
Right. So are you working on a new book right now?
I am. I'm really working on a new book, which is,
gosh.
Yeah, so it's set in Civil War era North Carolina, and it's based on a family story. And I do have to say that I didn't always write books set in the past. They were originally, I wrote contemporary novels, and I don't think writing a book set in the Civil War era is a very good idea because there are so many experts. There are so many people who know way more than you do. So I'm a little bit terrified about doing it, but because it's a family story, I felt compelled to do it. And that's what I'm working on.
So when you did the Exiles, and I guess the same is true for this book that you're working on with the Civil War, how do you keep all of this research together and organized so that you can put it into this story form that reads like you're in a movie? I know you are creating a movie for the book. I know you've got a project going on that the book will become a movie, but how do you keep all your notes together so that you can put this book and form all this research into an interesting story without losing the reader?
It's a really interesting question to me. I mean, maybe not to the people who are listening, but that's a super hard question about how you take all this research, which can be quite dry,
Right.
originally. So there's this great quote from Hilary Mantel, who wrote all these great books about Cromwell and Henry VIII. Her first one was Wolf Hall. And she said she writes contemporary novels that are set in the past. And I just love that description. The point being, you're trying to write novels that appeal to people today. You're not trying to exactly 100% approximate exactly what they sounded like, hundreds of years ago. It's more that you want to convey how people felt and thought in a period that most people haven't thought a lot about. And so with my novels, what I'm trying to do is show you, I mean, I've done so much research, so there's like all the historical underpinnings, but I also want the story to come alive. So the most important thing is that it just jumped to life, with characterization and with dialogue and with plot twists and all of it. So it's kind of a multi-edged enterprise to get the research right and then also to tell a story that is compelling to people. So that's my real challenge in writing the books. And I actually love the challenge. I love it. I love taking the research and trying to make it. I just think to myself every day as I'm working with these old stories, I'm thinking to myself, what is going to jump off the page? What's going to be compelling? What's going to be really interesting? What is going to draw people into the story? Because I also feel there's a little bit of a sort of, I don't mean to say like political edge. It's not that exactly. It's more that it's like, I want people to understand what it felt like to be so poor that you had no options. Going to Newgate prison was sort of like you would ended up at bottom and there you were. And that was the only thing available to you. So I guess I'm saying the world today is really complicated, but the world then was so hard. And there were no social programs and there was no way to kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And so for these women who were sent to Australia, they got off the boat in a new land and they discovered that they could be whoever they wanted to be, which was totally different from England, where they had lived in a stratified society. So how amazing is that you could do that you could reinvent yourself? I mean, it's unheard of in England at that time period in the 1840s. And what happened to these women is that if they survived the boat and they survived the prison, eventually they got to a place where they could actually be entrepreneurs. They could marry outside of their class. They could experience the world in a whole different way. And that was a joy of writing the book, that, it's a book with some tough parts, but my takeaway from the book is that it's super actually exciting. They invented a new land, a new society, and that's pretty wonderful.
Did you know when you planned the story that the ending would be that you would find that positive part of it?
I did, because when I went to Australia twice as an adult, and also once as a Rotary Fellow when I was in my 20s. I suppose I was an adult then, but you know, I have 20-year-old kids, so I'm not sure I call them adult. But I did. You know, the Australian nature, their culture, I'm sure you guys know this, is super positive. They're like, they love their culture, they love their, you know, barbecue, all the whole thing. And it just felt like I knew I would end up there, because Australia is such a positive, it's such a kind of, I think I may have said this, funhouse mirror of America, in that it is, they were founded as a penal colony. Okay, that's crazy if you think about it. Like, you're founded as a prison, that's your country, that's how it's founded. And America wasn't. But Australia is sort of has a like devil may care policy. I mean, they're just sort of like, look, we started at the bottom, there's nowhere to go but up. We're gonna go up. And I sort of love that about Australian culture. They're very positive. There's tons of great food. There's amazing attention to, you know, to sort of a green environment, to taking care of the world. There's a lot that's wonderful about Australia. And I think that grew out of their avant-garde, their sort of like prison culture. I love that. Yeah.
Well, and that goes along with parts of your book, because even when you have the women who were the prisoners were on the ships, there was one of your character was a Mrs. Fry, and she was a Quaker woman who she was a real person. And she went before the women got on the ship to travel to Australia. She and some of her co-workers or co-volunteers came and gave the women yarn and fabrics so that they could sew on the ship. And some of the women could read, but others couldn't. And they taught, you know, the ones that could read made friends with ones that couldn't read. In other words, they were building relationships on the ship, which I found interesting. They weren't on the ship seemingly, I'm sure there were fights and that type of thing, but they took what was a horrible situation and supported one another.
I think that's true. Yeah.
And the women, as different as they were, you had maybe one woman was a governess who grew up with her father, who taught her to read and had tea by the fire every night with him. Another woman was a prostitute. And these people became friends because they weren't on the boat judging one another. They were all in a bad place. But yet, what happened on that ship seems to have been portrayed in Australia, where they became, you know, they took the most horrible situations in their life and it became a positive thing. But
at summer camp, I mean, like, you know, you meet people who are nothing like you, and you know, you bond in the funniest of ways, or maybe you're at college the first year, or maybe you're at some work opportunity where, you know, maybe you're working at McDonald's and you like meet people who are nothing like you. I mean, I just do feel like part of the joy of writing this book was just forging connections between people who have nothing to do with it, have nothing in common. And I think that's super common, actually. Like our son, I have 3 boys, and they're 20, 24, and 26, whatever. And they're all, you know, figuring out their way in the world, but they're meeting people randomly through job things and, like, you know, happening to end up in the same place at the same time, whatever. And I just love that I was able to kind of work with that in this novel, that I was able to kind of show it's a motley connection of prisoners who end up together, but there is that in life. Don't you all experience that, you know, every now and then you're in a situation where people just are thrown together and they end up bonding. And that's part of, it's so universal.
Right. And in the book, they truly do. And they are true friends till the end. Another thing that I noticed in the book, there are 3 characters that are based on real life characters. One was Mathena, one was Mrs. Fry, and one was Dr. Garrett. And Dr. Garrett comes in the end. She's the first female physician and surgeon back in the 1800s, I think. Mathena was the Aboriginal girl,
Yeah,
and Mrs. Fry, as I already mentioned, she was the Quaker woman who devoted her life to women's prisons, I guess, into the
yeah.
conditions at the women's prisons. So when you're doing, when you have this idea for your book and you're doing your research, do you know these characters that you want to pull in that are real characters before
You
you
know, it
start, or do they
it
kind of
develops
pop
like
in?
it develops. I mean, there were a lot in this novel. Half the characters were real people. So Sir John
Oh,
Franklin,
that's
Lady
right.
Franklin, they were both real people. You know, Montague, who plays a pivotal role. I part of the joy of writing a book like this is figuring out real life characters in the moment who interact with with your fictional characters. You're creating a universe. It's very exciting. So I felt that the Franklins, John Franklin and Lady Jane, who took in Mathena, were sort of central, pivotal to the book. And so around them, I was able to build a bunch of characters. But it's really fun to work with real history and to try to get it right, to have historical consultants and figure out that you're, doing something that actually is part of the way people lived, and then building on it to create a story that hopefully will shed light on the period.
How hard is it when you're doing a story or basing your book on a different country? How hard is it to find the people who this is their business? Like, how hard was it to find somebody who knew all about Aboriginal
Well,
culture?
as you can probably tell, I'm a little bit obsessed. I get a little bit obsessed. And then it's quite easy because you just track people down. So I was interested in this idea. I started to research it. I found this woman online, Alison Alexander, this amazing world expert in the convict women. And I couldn't get her books here because she's Australian. And I ordered some of her books. Then I emailed her, I guess, on her website, and I made her be friends with me. And then I went to her. I literally went to her. I went to Tasmania twice. We became really close friends. She fed me in her home, my sister, my husband, it was just a whole love fest. Because you know what? The truth is, here's the truth. This is the fun thing about writing novels that are set in the past and that you have to do research for. A lot of historians, nobody cares what they do. Like they love what they do, and some people care, like a few people. But actually, they love to be discovered. So Alison Alexander had all this knowledge, and she was so happy to share it because she spent her life researching the convict women in Tasmania and in Australia. And so it was really exciting for her. And she was just like, I'm happy to share everything I know because she had so much knowledge. So now she's consulting on the film, and it's like,
Oh, wow.
all good. It's all good. And she's amazing. She's like in her 70s, as I said. She's written all these books. She deserves so much recognition, and I'm just thrilled that and that I'm thrilled that that's coming because she was hugely helpful to me. And she wrote a biography of Lady Jane Franklin. She's written about John Franklin. She's written about Mathena. I got so much out of being in her head, basically.
How long will it take the film to be created?
So it's a series, and it's being created by a team that is partly in LA, partly in Australia, and they do just huge. They did Gone Girl and Wild and Big Little Lies. What was the one they just did? My friend Jean Korelitz's book on HBO, The Undoing.
Wow.
They're amazing, and they're all. And I have to say, like secretly between us, they're all women, and so they're very kick-ass. Like the other projects, film stuff that I have going on with men, like nothing seems to be happening, but I mean, it is, but like it's slow. These women are just going for it so quickly. So I think that the Exiles movie actually, I mean, not movie, but series will actually happen before the other ones, just because they're so into it.
That's very exciting. Now along that vein, I am a perpetual Audible book
Me
person
too. Yeah.
because I cannot get through books fast enough. When I go home from work and I try to read at night, I fall asleep. So I listen to books in the car, I listen to them doing the dishes, all the time. How do you have a say in who your narrators are for your Audible books?
Okay, I feel like I wrote that question for you because they sent me 12 audio readers that I hated for the Exiles, and I found this kick-ass audio reader who's so amazing. So her name is Caroline Lee. She's a Shakespeare actor in Melbourne, and she narrated all of Leanne Moriarty's books, Big Little Lies and everything else, and a bunch of other Australian writers. She does all the accents. And I don't know what you thought, Joan, but like, I think she's unbelievable. She won an audiophile award for reading The Exile. So if any of you haven't done it yet, you might want to look at the audiobook because she is amazing and makes it
Well,
alive.
and like I said in the beginning, you can download the Audible book, well, not Audible, but through Overdrive and RB Digital, you can get it through the library for free. And I found myself, I was listening to it in the car, and I would be trying to speak like an Australian person because she had the Australian dialect down perfectly. So I'm driving along thinking, well, how do I say hoem? Trying to pronounce the words, but she did an excellent job. And she had the English accents, she had the Australian accent. She
I
was
think she's
fantastic.
unbelievable. Like I can't even imagine. I'm such not an actor. I don't know how to do any of that. So
Right.
and I'm so lame at any of that. So I just appreciate that she's so good at it. Hey, should we take this question from Kristen? So
Sure.
first of all, KG says, I'm British. Hi, KG. And Kristen says, I love the Exiles. I'm looking forward to reading your next book. It looks like you've been writing since your kids were young. How has your writing process changed? And by the way, I welcome any questions. And we're leaving in like 5 minutes. So if anyone has a question, put it in because I'd love to hear it. Okay, she says, you've been writing since your kids were young. How has your writing process changed in the last 20 years since your first novel came out? So much. Thank you for asking that question, Kristen. I wrote contemporary novels, and it wasn't until I stumbled on this story of my husband's family. His grandfather was featured in this article on Orphan Train Writers, and he was already dead. And I'm pointing over here because my husband is right there. He's right over there. Anyway, so he did not know. He was a history major in college, had never heard of the Orphan Trains. His mother had never heard of the Orphan Trains, even though her father was featured in this article about the Orphan Train writers in North Dakota. And so there was this whole family history that none of them knew. And as I was there for the unfolding of what happened, I realized this is a huge story that I don't know, that other people should know. And so even though I felt so intimidated because I didn't know anything I'm not Midwestern at all. I didn't know this story. It's not my people, even though I'm married to this guy. But I just didn't feel that I was qualified to do it. And it took like 5 years for me to like do all the research, sort of figure out, am I really qualified? And finally I said, look, nobody else is doing this. I might as well do it. So I wrote this novel about the Orphan Trains, and it became this huge thing. But that was because I think so many people didn't know that story, and I didn't either. And it was a really big story about America. 250,000 children sent on trains from the East Coast to the Midwest over 75 years in a labor program. That's a pretty big story that people didn't really know.
Were you able to spend as many hours writing when your children were young as you are now?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess we should have gotten back to that.
Yeah.
Let me think. Not maybe not. I mean, what I've learned is that, well, so part of the issue is that as my life has gone on and I have more and more books, I actually haven't spent a lot of time dealing with the other books. So there's a lot of stuff that goes along with being a writer that's not just about writing. So I feel in a way that my life was a lot simpler before. And now it's a little bit more complicated. And I'm like, today I spent all day doing questionnaires for blah, 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 whatever. And that's not writing. So, you know, there was I don't know if you guys remember when, was it Bill Clinton? I'm looking at my husband, was running for office, and James Carville had a thing above his computer that said, "It's the economy, stupid." I have to have one that says it's the writing, stupid, because there's so much associated with writing novels that isn't actually writing the words that will appear in a novel. So I have to remember that I can't just do all the PR shit, excuse my language, stuff. And I need to actually be sitting with my butt in a chair and writing the book.
Were you going to be a writer when you graduated from college?
Well, I always tell people that every child is born creative. You know, every child paints, draws, sings, dances, writes poetry and everything else, and that most of us outgrow it, and I never outgrew it. That's sort of the way I think of it. Look, my kids are creatives in a terrifying way for my husband and me. I mean, they're all musicians, and they all we're like, we don't, okay. We wish you were an investment banker, but okay. I mean, we love them, but we're scared about their future. But I was super scrappy. And this is what I tell my kids. Your avocation, the thing you love, may not be your vocation. So you need to have a way to make a living. You need to have a marketable skill, because you don't know that you're going to make a living from what you love. And so, but if you love it, you'll keep doing it. And at the same time, you need to find a way to make a living. So that was sort of my advice to myself. I mean, I grew up my parents weren't wealthy. I had massive student loan debt, and I just made it work by working all the way through until I didn't need to anymore, you know. And I think that is the lesson for my kids about doing what you have to do to if you want to be in the arts. It's a real gamble, and you gotta know that you have to make a living too.
Right. Okay, we have another question. Do you mind sharing resources of how to validate if someone was on an orphan train?
Yes, there are such fantastic resources. So my website has a lot of info, but the National NOTC, the National Orphan Train Complex, they are super helpful. And if you just Google that, the National Orphan Train Complex, you will find this website. If you call them, you just pick up the phone. They're like in Concordia, Kansas, nicest people ever. They'll help you if you have any questions.
Okay. Well, Christina, I know you're getting close to the end here, so I would like to encourage anyone else, if you have questions, go ahead and type them into the chat, or some people have turned their video on. If you'd like to turn your video on and turn your audio on and just shout out your question, that would be great.
I'm happy to answer anything, and we can also just end.
Beer if you want.
Okay. Anybody else have anything they would like to ask Christina tonight?
Yeah, I was going to ask how because she mentioned all of these different authors or historians or researchers that she contacted, met up with, made friends with. How did she find these people? Especially prior to Instagram.
Are you a writer?
Maybe someday. Yeah. Like, I love to write. Am I doing anything with it? No. Well, yes.
So this is the amazing thing to me about the web. I mean, you're a click away from knowing someone. And so I started Googling when I was starting on this book. I started Googling expert, sort of Australian history, women, Aboriginal stories, whatever. And I found this woman who just came up again and again and again because she's written 35 books, and yet nobody knows her in America. So I reached out to her through her portal on her website, and she responded, and we had this online communication. And then I flew to Tasmania and met with her and interviewed her. So like, Kristen, that's exactly what you can do. I mean, most people, this is the thing I would say about artists, about people who really love what they do, either, you know, researchers, professors, novelists, nonfiction writers, whatever. For most people, it's not like they're John Grisham or Stephen King or whatever. They're not like inundated with tons of people wanting them. So they're thrilled if someone is intellectually interested in what they're interested in. And they, chances are, will want to help you. And that is what I found in my whole career, is that there are people who just love what they're doing, love the research, love the story, and want to help. And I think there are a lot of people out there like that. And that's what I would say to you.
And I think along that same line, Christina, people, because of COVID and because of us learning how to do Zoom and these webinars online, people find that they can share more of their time with the rest of us because we can meet on Zoom. And
yeah, it's true. I mean, it's actually a whole opening up of possibilities for people who want to do research.
Right.
Kelly, did you have something you wanted to ask?
No, I just figured since I was done feeding the kids, I would turn my camera back on. But no, I really enjoyed the book, and I actually passed it along to my mother-in-law, and she has since shared it with some of her friends in her book club. So I really enjoyed the story. I got, I think, one of the first copies that came out to a small bookstore in Sykesville, Maryland. When I was visiting family, I happened to see it, and I was like, oh, I was like, this looks really good. And so I read it in like a couple days. It was really good. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I have to agree with Kelly. The cover was very enticing. And also,
and we have a new one for the paperback, but it's the same vibe. It's just got a woman on it, and I really like it. I think it's cool.
For anyone that's local in St. Mary's County, White Rabbit Bookstore, they're a little bookstore in California, Maryland, and they started out with children's items, but they got copies of the book for us. So if anyone wants to purchase their own copies, you know, stop by there and they'll have a copy for you. So with that, I think we're all set. We have a thank you for Bernadette. She's looking forward to reading The Exiles. And I think if you haven't read it, it's definitely worth picking up. Put yourself on hold for it at the library. And if you have the time, download the audio version, because it, like Christina said, the narrator is fantastic. So thank you so much.
Guys, it was so nice.
Thank you.
Absolutely. It was lovely to see you all. And thank you.
Thank you for joining us.